The 19-year-old from Lancashire vanished whilst walking to his accommodation on June the 17th. According to reports, a Guardia Civil spokesperson said the search operation has now finished, although the case remains open. It comes just 2 days after the force appealed for expert volunteers to help explore rugged terrain on the island. And here, a woman has been charged with misconduct in public office after a video allegedly showed a prison officer having sex with an inmate. 30-year-old Linda de Souza Abreu from Fulham was arrested by the Metropolitan Police on the 28th of June. That's after a video was filmed inside Wandsworth Prison, posted on social media. She's set to appear in custody at Uxbridge Magistrates Court on Monday. Well, Inside Out 2 has crossed a major box office milestone, taking more than $1 billion during its global release. In its just third weekend in cinemas, it's notched up ticket sales in record time for an animated film. The sequel to the 2015 original introduces audiences to a whole new cast of emotions inside a teenager's head, with joy, sadness and anger, unsure in the film how to react to the arrival of anxiety, envy and embarrassment. You'll have to watch the film to know exactly what on earth that all means. Well, in sport, England are trailing 1-0 against Slovakia, heading into the second half as the squad hope to book their place in the Euro 2024 quarter-finals. If you're watching on TV, you can see the fan zone in Wembley, where the atmosphere is significantly more sombre now that England are behind for the first time in the tournament. Kobe Mainoo started in place of Conor Gallagher in the only change to Gareth Southgate's starting 11. But England are now down to 10 players due to injury. And with a place against Switzerland at stake, Gareth Southgate's side were huge favourites to advance before kick-off. Those are the latest headlines for now. I'm Sam Francis and I'll be back with your next update at 7 o'clock.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
The worldwide threat to freedom comes not just from the globalists of the World Economic Forum and their ilk and their puppets squatting on top of the pyramid. Those determined to rule, to take and keep control of what everyone is doing to run the world, inevitably apply the tactics and make the moves we see around us. Bad faith individuals, bad actors, do bad things. We know this, or we should by now. More insidious than the agendas being pushed down onto our heads from above are the many and varied divisions that have been sowed at the same time, divisions between we the people. We've been set at each other's throats deliberately, even more so over the last 4 years, until we are blaming each other for all the trouble. I understand why it's happening because I feel the same urge, which is to build walls against those whose opinions differ from mine. I also feel the urge to find someone to blame for all that's happening. And it's easier to blame people I can see than people I can't. But when we give in to those urges, if we all behave this way, blaming each other, excluding others when we should be welcoming them, we do the baddies' work for them. They must be laughing at us now, laughing all the way to the bank. This atomising of people, the cutting of ties that should bind, making enemies of anyone and everyone, ends in a place where no one believes a word anyone else says, where no one trusts that anyone else is acting in good faith. As Martin says in the 1931 Dracula movie, they're all crazy except me and you. Sometimes I have my doubts about you. It's a zero-sum game. I watched the coverage of the release of journalist Julian Assange. It's been reported that he and his team reached a deal with his persecutors, one that rings alarm bells for human rights organisations. He and WikiLeaks had published hundreds of thousands of classified documents that laid bare the murky goings-on of the US government. And in response, they went after him with everything they had, aided and abetted by the government of the United Kingdom. After nearly 15 years of incarceration of one sort or another, incarceration without trial, Assange is a free man. And already he is being torn down in all manner of ways, not least on account of whatever was in the fine print of the plea deal. Human rights organisations fear the consequences of any pledge not to publish classified information. They fear the consequences for the First Amendment to the US Constitution, the consequences for freedom of speech, freedom of the press. I'm no closer to the truth of it all than any other member of the public, but there's no missing the determination out there, even now, by all manner of commentators, great and small, to seek to portray Assange as a sinner, someone not to be trusted. Assange is just one man, but what has happened to him, what is still happening to him, serves as a warning of what can happen to anyone in a world where freedom is regarded not as an inalienable right of all, but as conditional, grace and favour, a temporary pass handed down by the powerful and that might be snatched away at any time for any reason or for no reason. When governments snatched away our freedom on the pretext of what they insisted was a pandemic, a small and fragile coalition formed in opposition, questioning lockdowns, questioning mandates for masks and jabs. By now, that early unity has fractured, as elements within found it easier to shout down and tear down those notionally on their own side than to keep directing their fire towards the truly guilty. Into those cracks flowed the meddling of those guilty, exploiting the divisions and creating as many new ones as possible. Now the factions, angry and frustrated by all that's truly wrong, are entrenched in their own small camps, camps that are getting smaller by the day, lobbing grenades at one another. While it remains as true as on day one of all the malevolent nonsense of the COVID debacle that none of the guilty are being held to account, one voice after another asking some good questions has been ripped to shreds, discredited and cast down, not by the enemy, but by their own side. There's a purity test out there that no one can pass. Any past failing, real or imagined, is deemed to be grounds for cancellation by our own side. The most unforgivable sin of all is not having been aware and vocal soon enough, of having taken too long to realise what was going on. And this accusation is used to silence and censor almost at will. Among the most effective slurs applied with equal vigour by both the bad actors and those supposed to be fighting for freedom is that of controlled opposition. I looked up the term and found controlled opposition is the use of black propaganda and saboteurs who claim to oppose a particular faction but are in fact working for the faction. I've lost count of how many times I've been labelled controlled opposition. It's pretty much a daily occurrence, but it's thrown around like confetti. As a general rule, here's what happens. Someone finds an outlet for challenging some or all that's going on in this grievously and tragically altered world of ours, a world I struggle to recognise. And for some time, usually brief, they get a hearing. But as sure as eggs is eggs, someone, somewhere, eventually cries controlled opposition, and that mud sometimes sticks. For controlled opposition, you can also read shill and grifter. Always the intention is the same, which is to sow in as many minds as possible the idea that whomever is speaking, regardless of what they're actually saying, that they are either knowingly and deceitfully in the pay of big government or big pharma or the intelligence military-industrial complex, or perhaps worse, unknowingly and haplessly doing the bidding of any or all of the above bad actors without even knowing it. Either way, it's a crime that ensures a conviction every time. There is no way of successfully disproving the allegation of being controlled opposition. The only option is either to sit down and shut up or carry on under the weight of having been so attacked. As I say, this relentless attrition, the self-inflicted wounds, leads to one destination and one destination only, which is the bleeding to death of any hope of concerted opposition. As well as controlled opposition, shill and grifter, those speaking out are usefully labelled from a cornucopia of damning insults. Anti-Semite, racist, Putin apologist, anti-vaxxer, granny killer, far right, conspiracy theorist, take your pick and apply liberally. Julian Assange's character has been under attack by some for years. Whomever is stoking it, the intended end point is the same: to sow distrust, to have as many people as possible question motives and intent. These tactics make lonely outcasts of us all. Another consequence has been that anyone minded to raise their voice, to stand up, must face the withering fire, not just of the state and the puppets of the state, but of the very people they're seeking to stand alongside and help. It's in this way that the baddies always win. There are so many lines by which to be divided. Creed, colour, class, gender, politics, nationality. The list is endless. In order to turn the tables on the forces ranged against us, we have to set aside differences, real and imagined. Remember as well that my enemy's enemy is my friend. There will come a time when the war is finally won, when there might be a point in revisiting all those things that divide us as unique individuals. But for now, those differences must be set aside. The real threat to freedom is not posed by those alongside us, by those we can see. The real threat comes from above, from that thin veneer made of the parasite class that so successfully, over and over and over again, sets ordinary people against other ordinary people, drives us to hurt one another, so the parasites can, metaphorically at least, suck our blood. Within that fragile freedom coalition, where the only unifying factor and the only one we need is awareness that we are being played by those determined to control and exploit the mass of the population in every conceivable way. Within that coalition, we trip time and again over our own feet, and we do this by holding each other to an infinitely higher standard than those we should be concentrating on fighting and tearing down. A newly fledged voice, whenever it appears, is instantly scrutinised for every word and deed, present and past. That new voice might make good point after good point, ask pertinent question after pertinent question, but always the moment comes when the grievance archaeologists unearth some or other past remark or behaviour, or when the voice is heard to say just one thing out of line, and then the purity test is applied. The speaker is always judged to have failed, and the voice is silenced. And who wins? Who gains? The enemy every time. The simple fact of the matter is that it's unity we need, and a realisation that while we all have our imperfections and our past transgressions, we must allow for those, forgive those, at least until the war is won. Another simple fact is that the enemy is so much better at all of this than we are, not least because they've been at their corrupt and corrupting business for so long now. They say it takes 10,000 hours of practice and repetition to master a skill. Well, the enemy has been at it for a lot longer than that. Whatever their differences, however much they might dislike one another, along whatever lines they divide in terms of their objectives, they are utterly brilliant at sticking together to get what they want. They make mistake after mistake, get things wrong over and over, lie into our faces. But do you see them tear each other down? No. The past few years make it plain. They pushed a pandemic, they pushed products that may have been neither safe nor effective into billions of people. They provoke war and sacrifice the hundreds of thousands for the sole aim of making and laundering money. They get caught lying. They refuse, point blank refuse, to contemplate the dreadful consequences of what they did. They're exposed for all of these crimes and more besides, and are any of them ever held to account? On the contrary, the usual suspects, all the guilty parties, now have more prestigious jobs, more money, their reputations are untouched and unblemished. The politicians among them have the unmitigated gall to stand for re-election, and, which is the worst of all, they are collectively closer to their master's objectives than ever before. While we are goaded into hating one another, distrusting one another, our enemy stands shoulder to shoulder. To get where we want to be, to achieve what we want to achieve, being the protection of our freedom, we have to stop demanding of each other the condition of having been right about everything every moment. If any mistake, any failing, is always grounds for exile to outer darkness, then we all lose in the end. Here's the thing. Back in the old world, the IRA used to torment the British Army by saying, you have to be lucky every day. We only have to be lucky once. We let the state away with one mistake after another, while at the same time demanding a flawless, perfect record from each other, forcing each other to have to be lucky every day, not just to never make a mistake in the present or future, but to have made no mistakes in the past either. That won't work, because that's not possible. The state is already hard at work presenting opponents to their will as one sort of terrorist or another, when by now we should be aware of who is actually aiming to terrify us, the ones in elected office. The baddies make their own luck, And they do it by setting aside their differences, tolerating the infinite failings of which every one of them is guilty individually and collectively, and instead simply sticking together and ruthlessly backing each other up until the job's done. To have any real hope of finally turning the tables on our adversary, we must learn to do likewise, and quickly. Joining me this week for the duration of the show, friend and journalist Jasmine Birtles. Jasmine, do you know what I mean when I say I thought at the beginning that we were getting somewhere and that we were all going to stick together, and then it just fell away like sand in the face of a tide.
It does feel like it, and everything that you've been saying is elements that I've been noticing. But what I was thinking is it's what you see in families, in churches, in charities, in political parties. The worst is from the inside. When you have attacks from the outside, you can get together and, as you say, attack that, and that can put you together. But when you start to have infighting, and you find it in companies as well. I remember working with one company, a big one, that took no notice at all of their competitors. All they want, each department was like those awful people upstairs. There was constantly competing, with that other department, whereas they should have been putting their firepower against their competitors. And so it's not just in the freedom movement, it's not just in the movement of people who are trying to push for a new and better world. It's across the board, I think.
Where do you think it comes from? I mean, I was suggesting that the forces, ranged against us have been at whatever they're at for a long time.
Oh, yes.
Is it just an experience? Or is it because so many of us have sort of blundered into the arena, and we don't have the practice?
It's human nature, I think, honestly, and in a sense, the kind of people who are standing up and seeing what they're awake, they're seeing what's going wrong. Quite often we're more aware of wrong things, and when we'll point them out. We're quite sort of difficult people in many cases. That's why we're able to stand, but people who are compliant, who will go along with this, that and the other, they're the ones who don't understand why we're standing, why we're so annoyed, why we're so angry and upset.
And the controlled opposition thing.
Yes.
That's, and I've seen it, it's not just me, I've seen it applied to everybody else.
Yes.
Oh no, don't listen to them. That's
controlled opposition.
That's a Mossad asset.
Yes.
That's a CIA operative. That's come on.
GBNews constantly described as that. Absolutely. Tucker Carlson, whoever you like. Certainly Russell Brand. All the time I'm hearing him, and as you say, it's strewn around like confetti. It's very difficult to speak against, but it's very difficult to prove as well. So it's one of those things that just sort of hangs in the air and does nobody any good, other than, as you say, the forces that we're trying to fight.
Indeed. First break of the evening, after which I will be chatting to, and Jasmine also, Dr. Claire Craig, who has set up the Hope Accord, which, among other things, is calling for all mRNA products to be suspended. Plus, we'll be talking to a campaigner who says she lost her parents to dementia because of the Scottish Government's strict lockdown rules. You're watching the Neil Oliver Show on GB News.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Recent polling suggests dentistry has become the hardest NHS service for patients to access, within NHS treatments still 15% lower than pre-pandemic levels. So a YouGov survey reveals that more than 70% of Brits describe seeing the dentist as difficult, compared with 64% for GPs and 42% for A&E services. One British man, get this, he even took to flying 10,000 miles for dental care, saying the extra time and money spent was far less hassle than trying to get an appointment on the NHS. I mean, it's a sad state of affairs. And a shocking 1/5 of UK adults have also admitted to trying DIY dentistry, including the old trick of tying string around a wobbly tooth and slamming it in the door so it comes out. So should people be more careful when taking their teeth into their own hands.
That is one of the problems. Obviously, population growth makes it much more difficult for people to access NHS services, but they need to then catch up on the other side with dental services and increase the amount of dentists and access to dentistry, and especially NHS dentistry, obviously.
What's the cut-off age for free dentistry on the NHS?
So it is 18 years old, but there are exemptions around maternity, pregnancy. There's some free care around pregnancy.
We saw some data a few weeks back about the number one cause for child admission into A&E is tooth decay. I mean, that was shocking when I read it.
It's really bad, and what happens is people, kids with multiple decayed teeth, they basically have to be put under general anaesthetic, and then all those rotted teeth have to be extracted under general anaesthetic. Like, if those baby teeth start going crooked, then the adult teeth start going crooked as well. So it is important to look after the baby teeth. It's really important. I think they should make it more central to their policies, definitely.
The People's Channel.
Congratulations to the GB News winners at this year's TRIC Awards.
And the winner of Interview of the Year is... Alistair Stewart reveals his heartbreaking diagnosis to Camilla Tominey.
And the winner is GB News Breakfast. And the winner is Nigel Farage.
And thank you to you, our GB News viewers and listeners, for making us the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes. Thank you for joining us on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Neil Oliver Show. My first guest this evening is Dr. Claire Craig, a consultant pathologist who has carried out a great deal of research into COVID-19. Thanks for being here again, Claire.
Thank you for having me.
Familiar face here now. You've brought us the Hope Accord, which I've looked at, and I think it's quite a remarkable document. It's signed by various clinicians calling for, amongst other things, the mRNA platform or product to be, suspended. How has this come about?
Right, so it started off as a group of people who set up the People's Vaccine Inquiry in the UK. And that happened because 4 separate groups of professionals, the Heart Group, the UK Medical Freedom Alliance, the COVID Vaccines Children's Advisory Committee and the Perseus Group, had all submitted statements for the official UK inquiry, and that vaccine module of that inquiry had the can kicked down the road to 2025, and they've also got a situation now with sort of 12 days to hear 120 witnesses. So we thought, well, we've done all this work, it's not going to get heard, it needs to be heard, there's no point just waiting to be heard. So we'll get together and produce something that makes it accessible for the public, because it's important information. So we did that in collaboration with Patrick Fagan, who talked about the nudge aspects of what went on, and also with a group called Doctors for Patients UK, who are a large group of doctors with concerns who have been talking with each other and in contact with others as well around what they can do about the situation they find themselves in. So they've got, one employer in this country, they've got mortgages and families to think about, but they want to do something about their concerns. And several doctors within that group put a statement into the People's Vaccine Inquiry talking about what they've seen happen to their patients and how their patients have been affected by this. And that includes Dean Patterson, the cardiologist in Guernsey, who I think you've had on before, James Royal, who's a surgeon up in Newcastle, Aisha Malik, who's a GP in Birmingham. And when they started to write the conclusion to their statement, Tim Kelly, who's an A&E doc, saw this and thought, this has just got more value than just being the conclusion of this statement, because the point is it was something that all of these doctors could get behind. And we just need an ethical statement out there for doctors generally to be able to get behind and say we need to return to foundational medical ethical principles and to raise concerns about what's happened.
It's a good point, though, that what you've been saying and what has been found in the People's Vaccine Inquiry is earth-shattering. I mean, genuinely, it's earth-shattering. And yet, we haven't heard anything much about it at all. I mean, I'm a journalist, and I haven't seen very much at all about it in the press, in the media, maybe a little bit in the alternative media. I'm assuming it's being squashed, but there must be a way that we can get this information out there more.
I totally agree. And so one of the things that we've done with the People's Vaccine Inquiry is to give people calls to action, that what they can do to help get the word out there. So there's a letter there for people to print off and take to their GPs, so that their GPs can come and see all the information on that website, and also maybe to your prospective MPs. Why not? So the public can absolutely help with this. We need them to help with this because you're right that it's been ignored, and these are all serious, highly qualified people speaking rationally and carefully with evidence, and they're being ignored.
Absolutely. Now, there's always an alternative point of view in all of this, especially this. We have now GP, General Practitioner, Dr. Malcolm Kendrick, who's kind enough to join us as well. Hello, Dr. Kendrick.
Hello, thanks for inviting me on.
How do you react to this as a GP? You're in the front line of care, and this suggestion of a return to ethics, a pause at the very least, if not a removal of the mRNA products, and really a root and branch consideration of how the pandemic was handled and what that should tell us about the future.
Well, I think to sort of hold up my hand, I was sceptical about a great deal of the way that the pandemic was handled, especially some of the things that happened in nursing homes was outrageous in my opinion, definitely. And I think that part of the problem with the inquiry is, as I've tried to explain to everyone, the inquiry is not going to decide whether or not lockdowns or any action taken were or not appropriate. That really won't be what their remit is. It will be to look at whether or not the systems that exist could be improved in the future. So I don't think we're going to get any answers to anything from the COVID inquiry particularly. I think when it comes to vaccines, I mean, clearly these vaccines were introduced in a rush, in a hurry. That's true. I think anyone would support people looking into potential vaccine damage in more detail. The problem is that both sides seem to be making astonishing claims, and it's very difficult to believe either of them. I think, did I read 46 million lives have been saved by vaccination? Maybe I'm making that up, but I'm sure somebody made a claim like that.
Is it not the case, though? Is it not the case that it's not questioned that people have died, and many more people than have died are facing long-term consequences as a result of the mRNA products? And at what point do we say, right, suspension at the very least, and these things don't come back onto the market and they don't go into even one more arm without some kind of review?
Well, I think that one of the problem issue here really is that, of course, in fact, I wrote a blog when COVID started saying that I suspected that after all the lockdowns and everything, the rate of cardiovascular disease would explode for mainly for sociological, psychological reasons, and that's happened. Also, almost everyone has been exposed to and has been infected with COVID. So you've got an enormous confounders all over the place here, which I think making claims of enormous harm are difficult. And I understand that doesn't mean you shouldn't look at them and you shouldn't deal with them. But I think that there's too much hyperbole, if you like, on both sides. But you've got to get people to listen. And I think you start off by
Hold that thought, Dr. Kendrick, because I simply have to get to a break. But we're going to continue with this. We're going to pick up this conversation again with Claire Craig, Jasmine and Dr. Kendrick after the break. Bear with us, don't go anywhere.
Good evening and welcome to your GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. Well, a changeable week ahead with some rain and showers, plenty of dry weather around too though. For today though, we've got a frontal system clearing its way southeastwards, allowing a ridge of high pressure to build, bringing a fairly settled evening. Notice the winds coming from a northwesterly direction though, meaning things are going to be feeling a little bit cooler. A change on the way into this evening though, as we see outbreaks of rain move their way into western and northwestern parts of the UK. But on the whole, overnight, plenty of dry weather around, a mix of cloud and clear spells. And under those clear spells, it will feel a little bit cooler, but most towns and cities remaining in the double digits. An unsettled picture as we head into Sunday, particularly across northern areas, as we'll continue to see those outbreaks of rain edge their way into eastern parts of Scotland. So fairly damp in the west, a few drier spells before that rain moves in the east. Quite a damp start too across Northern Ireland, northwestern parts of England, but once again in the far east, around Yorkshire for example, fairly dry with some bright sunshine to start. And similar across the south and southeast, a mix of cloud, but also some bright sunny spells to start the day on Monday. Generally though, it is going to be quite an unsettled picture. Outbreaks of rain spreading their way eastwards across the country, a little bit heavy at times across hills in Scotland. Generally though, later on across Wales and the south and southeast, a bit of cloud around, but some sunshine breaking through, particularly across southern parts of Wales and Devon and Cornwall. A bit cloudier in the southeast, but that's where we'll see the best of the temperatures, highs of around 21 Celsius. For Tuesday, another north-south split with some showers and some longer spells of rain feeding into the northwest and later on into northern parts of England and northern Wales. And across the south and southeast, that's where we'll have the driest of the weather again and the best of the temperatures. Turning windier from midweek, but plenty of dry weather around too. Bye for now.
This election night, we're putting on a party.
And you are invited.
We'll be here with you.
Following all the twists and turns.
As well as all the live reaction from our election night watch party.
With our GB News lineup.
And as morning breaks, we'll be here with breakfast from 6 a.m.
As it becomes clear who the winners and the losers really are.
Vote 2024.
Thursday, the 4th of July.
Only on GB News.
Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates.
You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it? Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Neil Oliver Show. Still with me, Dr. Claire Craig and Jasmine Birtles. There are so many facets to this story around what happened to us in the time of COVID. And ultimately, it's a story about people, what was done to people, what happened to people. And we're now going to speak to Alison Walker, who says harsh lockdown policies in Scotland led to her parents suffering, especially from isolation during the COVID pandemic. Alison gave evidence to the Scottish COVID inquiry, and her parents, Sandy and Olive, are still in a care home in Glasgow. Thanks for joining us, Alison.
Thanks for having me on, Neil. Good to be here.
Tell us what happened. I'm always it always comes down to people. What happened to individuals and what happened to your parents?
Yeah, Mum and Dad, dementia is a cruel and tortuous disease, and when the lockdown first started, I knew straight away the impact that it would have on Mum and Dad, especially my mum, who wasn't quite as advanced in her dementia as my dad. She still was able to get out and about and go out for coffee and interact, and the key was being part of the family. The key to keeping somebody relatively stable with dementia, which is a dreadful disease, is family life, is contact, is human touch, is mixing with people, is stimulation. You remove that, then you know the disease is just going to escalate beyond belief. So I knew at the start of lockdown that this was going to be really, really, really disastrous for my parents. I got the panic at the start from the two governments, Scotland and England. I got it slightly, and then I thought after a month, I thought this cannot continue. So I've been campaigning more or less since, March 2020 to make sure that we got in to see them, to re-establish that vital contact. And to be honest, it just went from bad to worse. And now my parents, they're in a sorry state. They have no idea who anybody is. They just hang their heads. It's the most dreadful disease at the best of times, and then the worst thing that could happen to them happened to them. And I know if I was to have the conversation with them pre-COVID and I said, would you rather not have family or be locked away so you didn't get COVID, I know what they would choose. They would rather die.
It's desperately upsetting, and the images there, the transformation that your folks have gone through is well, it's only heartbreaking to look on at that. What was the difference that was imposed upon you? Pre-COVID, were you able to be just in daily contact with them so that you were able to keep all the ties that bind intact?
Yeah, more or less. I mean, dementia is a chronic condition. You're going to get worse anyway. But it was all about trying to stabilise my mum in particular, and we kept her stable, and she knew the family members. So, I took her swimming, I took her to ballet classes, I took her for coffees. We interacted with lots of members of the family. So, I knew how important it was. I worked so hard at keeping her stable. And then this kicked in, and I thought, well, maybe the lockdown's not going to be too long. And then it went on for 2+ years. Plus, she's deaf, Neil, and she relied on lip reading to communicate. And of course, they were all wearing masks around her. So she's lost the ability to even speak. She just makes noises now. And I'll give an example of the impact on my dad. I got called in April 2021 because they thought he was end of life. I hadn't seen him for months. He can't communicate on any technology. So he's 90, and his brain has really affected him badly. So I got called in. I got called into his room. I had to be fully suited up. As soon as I got into the room, I ripped everything off. And my dad was lying there, grey, barely breathing. I don't know what death looks like. I've never encountered it before. And I thought, is this it? I was all by myself. Nobody else, other family members weren't allowed in. And, I put my hand under the covers and I grabbed his hand, and it was warm. And I said, Dad, if you know me and you feel me, squeeze my hand. And he did. He squeezed my hand and his eyes flickered. And I saw him put his tongue out and he licked his lips and he opened his eyes and he looked at me. And I said, do you need a drink, Dad? And I got him a drink and helped him drink it. And from that day onwards, he perked up and he's still with us. Now, that for me indicates the power and the hope of family. And that was taken away from thousands and thousands of residents in care homes, and a huge breach of human rights, which the Scottish COVID inquiry has just confirmed that the adverse effect on residents' physical and mental well-being outweighed the risk posed by COVID-19. Multiple breaches of human rights have now been confirmed. Article 8, the right to family life, and the threshold of degrading and inhumane treatment contained in Article 3 has also been met. None of this surprises the family members, Neil. We knew this, and yet we pummeled the government with information and evidence, and neither government did anything about it. And the result is thousands died, probably more through isolation, lack of contact because they gave up, And, you know, the rest of there's loads of thousands of, like my mum and dad now, who are in a terrible state as a result of the lockdown policies.
Alison, bear with me. Dr. Malcolm Kendrick, you still with us? I think it's harrowing testimony, surely. You know, as a society, we have to... That's just one example. It's just one family. And if proof were needed about how much was wrong...
Well, I think that the lockdown policies in care homes was I believe brutal in the extreme. In fact, I can use the example of my own mother, who is not demented, but her view was essentially, I've lived long enough, and getting locked down is terrible and isolating, and I'd rather catch COVID and die personally. I mean, I realise that's just one reflection, but I think nobody asked, you know, the care home staff were being allowed to work in different care homes and move from one to the other, and they were sending patients in from hospital with known COVID. So the whole lockdown thing just seems to have been, well, it's hard to describe the words for it. So I'm in total agreement here that this was an extraordinary and destructive actions that were carried out, as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you, Dr. Kendrick. Claire, a last word from you. I mean, surely, my goodness, we need hope. The hope accord. I mean, when you hear testimony from Alison Walker about her mum and dad, and a GP in the front line, you know, acknowledging harm's done, you know, do we have hope that we can deal with these things in a more humane, ethical way?
Well, we can't deal with them in a less humane, ethical way. So, yes, that's where the hope lies. You know, there's only one way we can go with this. And I would just like to say that in terms of the care homes, in winter of 2021, with the second wave, there was a study from Cambridge University where they showed that the various variants that were in the Cambridge community were all present in test results from care home residents because it spreads through the air. So none of these lockdowns and restrictions did anything to help these people. It was all harm. And the other thing I'd say regarding the cardiovascular risk is that what we've seen is there used to be 2,000 daily ambulance calls for life-threatening emergencies, and we now see 2,500. And it was a change that happened in spring 2021. It was and that is when it happened. So I agree that there were other factors, as in, you know, the psychological harms of lockdown were real, and we saw a rise in cardiovascular deaths in young people in autumn of 2020, because that is real. But the vaccines clearly are a big part of that story.
Thank you, Dr. Claire. Craig, thanks, Jasmine, as well for your contribution. Thank you, Alison Walker. That your testimony goes right to the heart of it. And thank you, GP Dr. Malcolm Kendrick. It's only time that has forced us to bring this fascinating, harrowing conversation to a close. It's another break, after which WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, a free man, as he bids to rebuild his life. I'll be speaking to the co-founder of Wikipedia, Larry Sanger. You're watching the Neil Oliver Show on GB News.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
So, question is, what can we do to get young people to eat healthy food? Here's dietitian and nutrition consultant Helen Bond. Helen, what do you think?
Eating habits formed at this age tend to persist into later life. We know we're eating too much fat, sugar, salt, and not enough of the good things like fibre, you know, fruits and vegetables, all of those things. So yes, we need to help this age group so they have the skill set and they have the nutrition knowledge to take that forward.
Do you agree that it is impossible to eat healthily on a budget and quickly as well, or do you have any sort of fail-safe, affordable and very quick to prep meals that you'd recommend youngsters try?
It doesn't have to be expensive either, but you have to have those kind of cost-cutting hacks and those time-saving things in the kitchen. You know, make use, I always say, of things like peas, beans and lentils, which they're a type of pulse, very inexpensive compared to meat, and yet they double up as one of your fibre a day, and also a great source of plant-based protein. You know, if you overget a milk as something, you have too much milk, maybe make some lattes.
I just wanted to throw a shoe at the TV, really, because was there nothing else on or nothing else available? The point being, there is an audience, there's obviously an appeal, there's obviously people are watching this stuff. So what are they doing? Are they watching and not cooking?
I think that's it. They're watching and maybe enjoying all the cookery programs like I do. And I'm a typical person in the kitchen. I must have about 100 cookbooks. But sometimes when you are time poor, you know, you've got to feed a family or you've got to feed yourself and everything, you don't really know where to start. And I think that's why apps and having things online for this younger audience makes it much more accessible. Start with one recipe and build it up from there. Like I said,
The People's Channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
As time passes,
She could have saved Storm. You made my argument for me.
My guest and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
Went everywhere.
something practical could be done.
Or I can become something different.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Neil Oliver Show. Now, here's something I wasn't expecting to say, possibly ever, but Julian Assange is a free man and he has landed back home in his native Australia. For the past 14, 15 years, Assange has been in a legal battle with US officials who accuse them of leaking classified documents, which they say put lives in danger. But after a plea deal, he left his London prison cell behind earlier this week. To discuss this, I'm joined by the co-founder of Wikipedia, Larry Sanger, a man as concerned as I am with all matters relating to freedom and freedom of speech. Larry Sanger, thank you for joining us.
Well, it's good to be back with you.
This is, if there was an iconic figure in terms of the threats that are being brought to bear upon freedom of speech, I think for a lot of people, Julian Assange would be that individual. What do you think we learn from this development now?
Well, I think they didn't want to give Donald Trump a win by Assange being freed under his watch. Over the last 5 years or so, Assange has grown from being basically a just libertarian hero to being really a hero of press freedom and basically freedom from tyranny all around the world. So freeing him was it had to be done, and it was only a question of when, I suppose. The thing that I find really, important about this case is that Assange represents a free press, and a truly free and independent press means proper government surveillance. In other words, we surveil the government, not the other way around. An independent press in particular is essential. This means one that is not controlled by the very government and intelligence apparatus that Julian Assange exposed. And so really his arrest, his persecution was a strike by the deep state against those who would try to properly oversee it.
Do you think, would there be any cause for concern? I mean, obviously we don't know the full nature of the plea deal or whatever was arrived at in order for Julian Assange to get out of Belmarsh. Are there any? Should we be worried about any of that? You know, this idea, will it have discouraged anyone from ever again having the temerity, so to speak, to publish classified documents?
Yeah, that certainly is a concern. But, you know, I actually think there's enough really bold, passionate journalists out there still that that this isn't over. I do think, in fact, that there are possibly Julian himself will continue, and others will continue. I think the fact that he had to spend so much time in prison for the crime of journalism, basically, that in itself was the great damage done to press freedom, frankly. The fact that he has gotten out and was sentenced to time served, well, I think that actually that is a qualified win, I would think. But still, I mean, it's a shame that he ended up having any sentence imposed on him at all.
Larry Sanger, I'm just short of time this evening, but thank you so much. We will speak again on related matters sometime very soon. Thank you, Larry Sanger. Jasmine, what was your reaction to what's happened here? There's so much being said about Julian Assange, about the case. What was your response to this sudden news?
Well, like Larry, I think there's been a shift of thought, and it's been a political hot potato. Nobody wanted to be the ones to be against, seen to be against freedom. And I think there's been a massive shift of thought amongst the public worldwide in the last few years. And I'm an example of it, because I remember at first when Assange came out, you know, he was attacked for what he'd done. I thought, oh, this is terrible. He's exposed all sorts of spies and etc. And then gradually I realised, no, what he'd done was exposed what various American presidents had done, the wars, the warmongering, all this wickedness. So I then became somebody who stood with banners outside of the courts.
You've been there and fought the fight.
Yeah, I have.
Jasmine, thank you so much for just now. That's it for the Neil Oliver Show on TV this week. That's the end of the TV hour, but there's plenty more coming online at gbnews.com, so you know where to be for the rest. I'll be continuing the discussions with more guests and always in the company of my fabulous panellist, Jasmine Birkles. Free Speech Nation is up next, and I'll see you next week.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
£30,000 in tax-free cash really could be yours. It's our biggest cash prize of the year so far, and you could be getting that winning call from us to tell you that you're our next Great British Giveaway winner.
You're joking. Really? Seriously? It's not a line, what is it?
I'm slipping neck. Oh dear.
Oh my God. This is amazing.
I'm in shock. Like I said, I've never won anything like this. That is absolutely fantastic.
We're over the moon. Thank you.
For a chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash, text cash to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2, or post your name and number to GB07 PO Box 8